right. Well, 1 o'clock. We are going to get started. We want to welcome everybody, and those of us who will be joining us shortly, or those of you who are watching the recording of this webinar, to part 2 of this series sponsored by Expert Online Training called Welcoming Transgender Campers. It's part of a monthly series that Expert Online Training supports and sponsors, where we bring in different members of our faculty and other experts to talk about issues that are of great import to youth development professionals, owners and directors of camps and parks and rec departments and other youth serving organizations. So today, as you know, our topic is transgender campers, and this is a part 2. If you have not yet visited Expert Online Training's YouTube channel, you can do that to watch a recording of all of our webinars, including the ones we did last year and the year before. But most importantly for today, we're going to be taking this issue of welcoming transgender campers to a more advanced level. And Sarah, who's our moderator for today and also a contributor, will refer anyone who's got a question that we cover in part 1 to that recording. And that'll enable us to deal with some questions that we didn't get to in part 1, and also perhaps some more complex issues that might occur. So that's how this webinar fits in. And my brief bio is that I'm a clinical psychologist and the co-founder of Expert Online Training. Along with Alex, I'm on the faculty of Phillips Exeter Academy, and I spend a good part of the summer traveling to different camps and other youth serving organizations to do staff training workshops. So that's me. I'm Chris.
All right, I'll go next. Thanks for the introduction, Chris. My name is Sarah Kurtz McKinnon. I'm also a camp consultant and trainer. I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So I spent about a decade with the Ann Arbor YMCA, serving as the director of Camp Algonquin for most of that time. And I'm now a director at Camp Tall Tree, which is a camp for kids with autism. And I run the siblings program at Camp Tall Tree. So doing a ton of work in the professional development space for camp, and also getting my MBA at the University of Michigan. So I love thinking about camp and talking about camp. And I'm a recent faculty member with Expert Online Training. So it's been a fun adventure as well. And I'm pleased to be here with Chris and Alex and to take your questions, to throw some of my own tough questions at these two. So that's my role here today. What about you, Alex?
Great. Hello. I'm Alex Meyers, and I'm an English teacher at Phillips Exeter Academy. I'm an openly transgender guy as well. I came out in 1995. And since that time, I've been working with mostly schools and a lot of camps and youth organizations, as well as just society in general, doing work to educate people about transgender individuals, transgender identity, and helping schools and camps to support transgender youth.
And Sarah, before you start with your first question, I'll let everybody who's watching here or the recording know that at the end, I'll make sure to post everybody's contact information. So folks want to be in touch with Alex, for example, to invite to their camp, or with you, our emails will be posted. So that's it.
Great. Awesome.
Let's get to it.
Great introductions, very efficient, 1:03 p.m. So I thought we'd start with some questions about just talking with kids in general about gender identity. Thinking about, this is a complex, in some cases maybe mature topic for some kids and adults. And so what if, a camper comes out as transgender at camp, or the topic even just comes out by surprise? How do we handle, navigating these conversations, knowing that our kids are coming from all different points of understanding to start with, and there's just a lot of factors there. So what would you all say about communicating around this topic with kids?
Sure. I think that sometimes when we talk about supporting transgender students and campers, we get fixated on what to do about the trans kid, and it's just as important to teach all youth to talk about and to understand gender identity for their own identity, regardless of whether they're transgender or not. So I've worked with camps that have led discussion programs in their bunks, say at an all-boys camp, about something like grit and grace, and looking at what it means to be a boy, or masculinity. And I know that girls' camps do similar things. And I think that's the key, is to set this up as a topic of conversation before it's a quote-unquote problem.
Sure.
Yeah, I would just add to what Alex said and ask everybody who's watching live or recorded to think about how preemptively you weave in a conversation about gender into the first day of your program? How is that included in the introduction that a counselor makes to his or her group at a day camp, or a cabin leader makes to his or her cabin at an overnight camp? And I think that accomplishes a number of things. First, it would put anyone at ease if they have questions, which every person on the planet does, about their own identity, bigger or smaller questions, and it makes it, oh, this is a topic we can discuss. And I also think that it would make anyone who is asking some big questions about their gender identity or anything else that the cabin leader or counselor brings up, more confident that they could speak to that adult about what's on their mind. For years, to give a parallel example, I have recommended in the trainings that I've given on preventing homesickness that in their opening night talk, every cabin leader should say, hey, one of my jobs, if not my most important job, is to support your experience here at camp. And I want you to let me know if you're having a good day or a not good day, if you are, you forgot where the basketball court is, yeah, and you want help getting there, or if you're feeling homesick because, there's something about home that you really miss. Whatever's on your mind, big or small, as fast-paced as the day is, I'm never too busy to listen. And everyone panics when I recommend that they use the word homesickness as if that's somehow going to create a problem that wasn't there. And, all the research is clear. The opposite is true. And I think the same can be said for talking about gender. If you broach it as a topic, especially early on, you increase everybody's comfort level with it, and ultimately their fluency with, how they talk about it, how they think about it.
Yeah, this is a super interesting thing to me, because I think our tendency with gender right now, if we're trying to be super inclusive, is to almost pretend that gender doesn't exist, or like almost not even talk about it. And I think in some respects that helps. We don't have to make everything gendered, but in other respects we want spaces for people who identify as girls to talk about that, or boys to talk about that. So how do you reconcile just the juxtaposition of those two things, to be inclusive of everyone, regardless of their gender identity, but also give people chances to celebrate their gender identity?
Right. I think one of the mistakes we sometimes make in trying to be gender inclusive is that we tend towards this gender neutral, which is a term I really don't like and don't support the use of. To be gender inclusive is to recognize that some people are very feminine and some people are very masculine, and those might or might not correspond to their being male or female, and to celebrate and allow and permit femininity and masculinity and a mix of those two things, without bias or discrimination based on that, saying you belong in one place because you're feminine, or you shouldn't be too masculine here. But I think that requires awareness, not just of transgender identity, but of what gender is and how it works and the assumptions we make. But no, I would never try to destroy the gender binary in the name of supporting transgender campers. And I certainly wouldn't try to say we shouldn't be feminine or masculine. We should be who we are, and we should question assumptions that are made about that.
Mm-hmm. I like the way of thinking about that. So kind of going back to this, Chris, did you have something to add?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, maybe turn up your mic just a tad, but I don't think you can turn up your microphone. I think, but we can hear you loud and clear. Just at the beginning of that phrase that I lost.
Oh, so I was thinking about, so we want to preemptively have safe conversations around gender identity, self-expression, etc. at camp. But sometimes we have to respond when something does happen. So kind of going back to my first question, if we have a cabin of campers and a camper comes out or tells the other campers that he is transgender, or maybe it's the first time they came out, or maybe they have transitioned and they're coming out in that way. What do you do in that situation as a camp leader, as a camp counselor? I mean, I get this question a lot, do other parents need to be notified? Who needs to be notified? How do you navigate when that happens?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. So I think the impulse sometimes is to ask the child, what do you want? What would feel good to you? And that's kind in some ways, but that's also a lot to put on the kid. So I think one of the crucial things to do is to anticipate this as a camp beforehand, and to be ready with options to offer that child, and to say, what would feel comfortable? Would you like me to have a conversation with your bunkmates? Is this something you've talked about with your parents? And quite literally to have a checklist to go through and to make sure you're covering all your bases. I think you do want to make sure that the child is questioning, is sure about this. This is something they have talked about with their parents. Where are they in their journey? And don't make assumptions that you immediately need to disclose to everybody involved. This may be something that they're trying on. It may be something that they're figuring out, and they very much want to keep it private. But I would prepare and run through with your staff a set of scenarios, and then, if the child says, yeah, I often cross-dress at home, and it's something that I've told my parents, but now I really want to go by she, her, hers for pronouns, then you can say, that's great. How do you want to share that with other campers? And if they do want to share that with other campers, that's the point at which you may have a discussion about, okay, do we need to let parents know? Do we need to, how would we inform them? And those sorts of ramifications. But do that before you have a kid who comes out. Do that well in advance.
And Alex, do you think it's beneficial? I mean, I know that a lot of the attendees in part one were asking about, either they asked about it or you suggested, but we had a discussion about weaving into the camp's non-discrimination policy that, in terms of hiring staff, in terms of welcoming campers, that, you don't discriminate on the basis of XYZ, including gender identity. And after that first webinar, I went and looked. I think there are only 11 of the 50 states that explicitly protect discrimination based on gender identity. Is that jive with what you understand as well, or
yeah,
I might be one or two off, but it's just 10 or 11 or 12.
Yeah, it's about 16 states. New Hampshire is currently voting on it this week, but there are hundreds of municipalities that do protect on the basis of gender identity. So there are some local laws, and I think most camps, like most schools, have non-discrimination clauses of their own regardless, but you may find yourself in a state like Massachusetts that extends those protections, and therefore you need to do certain accommodations to your facilities. I think there's an interesting question to be made about how a camp markets itself, and the non-discrimination clause is part of that marketing. What are you presenting to parents? Do they know what they're getting into? If you think of your camp brochures and websites, are you showing kids who are simply feminine and masculine in a stereotypical way? Are you showing kids who are overtly gender fluid? Do you have a tomboy on there? Who are you showing, and what are you championing, so that the parent who picks up any literature about your camp can tell right away, this is a safe place for my child who may be questioning these things, or this camp aligns with my values. And no parent can then say, boy, I'm really surprised that you're allowing a boy to move into a girl's bunk, for instance, or something else. You've been up front, and you know where you stand as a camp.
Yeah. So in addition to the marketing materials and the photographs, does it also behoove a camp to have some language, not just non-discrimination language, but to say, we have in the past, and we continue to welcome, let's just say it's an all-girls camp, any young person between the ages of 8 and 16 who identifies as female, and that conveys very clearly like what's going on, and maybe additional language, but is that a good start for a camp?
Yeah, I would encourage, especially a single gender camp, to really think about who they want to admit and who they want to retain. Are you interested in having people there who have lived experience as girls, currently identify as girls, or simply who would enjoy the experience of an all-girls camp? Those are all very different ways to articulate your standpoint, whether you're being true to a particular mission, or whether you see yourself as being available only to a limited scope of people who were raised as girls and who understand themselves to be girls, is very different than somebody who has ever in their life identified as a girl.
That's
So
interesting.
yeah, and we're doing this like virtue or value signaling to show people that, you know, we are inclusive or we're prepared to, you know, safely include transgender campers at our camp. And we had a question in the comments. How do, and Elise writes, how would you recommend prepping parents that their children might be having these conversations away at camp? Like if I'm a parent and transgender issues aren't on my mind, like that the picture of, you know, a gender nonconforming child like might not even register on the brochure. So, you know, we have to train our staff. Are there things that we need to do to train our parents that camp is like part of the real world and we're real about things and, you know, that sort of stuff? How would you suggest we train our parents for maybe any sort of tough conversation that might happen while their kids away?
I'm big on transparency and bringing parents into the conversation rather than trying to keep them on the periphery. And so I would recommend sending home or having in your marketing materials top sample topics of conversation. So if you have fireside chats or bunk conversations, and you might say things like, we talk about relationships and intimacy. We talk about gender and what it means to be a boy. And by putting those terms out there, again, there's no surprises for the parents, and they're not shocked when their kids say, oh, we talked about sex last night. And you say, well, yeah, that was, we told you that. We advertised that in advance. It can be a pretty robust list that runs from, you know, being safe with your jackknife to all the way through intimacy and other sensitive topics. I think camps are a perfect place to talk about that in so many of these topics where kids can feel comfortable, can feel like they are themselves, as well as be able to step out of who they are sometimes. But you do want to let parents know what they're getting into.
Yeah, and then the parents can continue the conversation at home a little bit too, or at least have some idea. Because if it just happens at camp, it's almost no good if you only do it one day out of the whole year, right? So how do we continue the conversation?
Yeah, and I think, Sarah, to build on what both you and Alex said, parents appreciate the little bit of coaching or advice or information before. They also love the follow-up from the camp director, which we would do if, you know, there were a natural disaster. Like I recall one, you know, summer where the camp where I've been going for almost 40 years had a microburst blow through, like a small tornado, and nobody was hurt, but it was really loud, really scary. Trees went down, you know, thunder and lightning, and you know, probably the most extreme weather event anyone had witnessed. And you know, the camp director, this was even pre-email, printed out 290 copies of the same letter describing what had happened, describing the you know, supportive response of the staff, letting the parents know what questions their kids might have. Now, you know, gender, sexuality, those are completely different things than a microburst, but the concept, of course, is the same. Parents, I think, are tremendously appreciative. And I'll add one other piece, which is some summary of the way in which the staff are trained. So I think a lot of parents would be relieved to read in the camp promotional material on the website or brochure or something that we're going to be discussing healthy relationships. We're going to be discussing femininity, masculinity. We're going to be talking about media and the, you know, over-sexualization of, you know, products, or whatever it might be. And of course, you're doing this in an age-appropriate way, but you need to, I think, say in the next sentence or two, you know, that these conversations happen in, you know, in an age-appropriate way. The staff are trained in these particular topics. They've all read parts of this book. Here it is if you want to read it. And we'll do our best to post something on our website that will guide parents in some follow-up discussion. So as long as parents don't feel like as Alex said, you know, broadsided by the camp advertised itself one way but delivered something else, then that's good. And I think also that, you know, as both of you have said, partnering with parents is so helpful, and camp is, as Alex said, the ideal place for kids to be themselves. It's the #1 thing that kids said they love about camp in the ACA's national research, back in the mid-2000s. And as you said, Alex, a chance to maybe try on being someone that they haven't sort of been able to showcase before something. I think it's wonderful. The more accepting we are in all kinds of different ways, the more comfortable people feel. And it's like the opposite of every parent's concern is that, oh, well, if this gets discussed, or if there's a, transgender boy in my son's cabin, will they still enjoy camp? And I don't know. I have a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old who have been through the public school system here in Exeter. And granted, they have fairly liberal, progressive parents. But to them, the fact that they now have, out transgender students in their class is not a novelty. And that's pretty different from, the elementary school days that, I recall. So, that's some progress.
Yeah. So, this is so hard though, right? Like if we're starting a new camp from scratch, we can do all these things because we're new. But if for the past 120 years, we haven't talked about this at all, and we say some of these things, we're putting ourselves as camp leaders at risk for backlash, right? And that sucks and it's wrong, but it's also a real possibility. And so how do you prepare for that? And like, what do you say when people come to you and say things like, oh, well, someone's like pretending to be a transgender girl so they can like get in the girls' locker room, or, whatever other things that people come up with. These are really, really intense conversations that you could feel yourself having, and maybe even in a public space. So what do you do with that side of the reality as well, as the person who's in charge of the camp?
Yeah, just what you said there about the idea of pretending, or sexual predators trying to get into spaces. Yeah. We know this is part of a national conversation. It's much bigger than camps. It's much bigger than schools. It's something that we have some anxiety about and we haven't sorted out. So yes, as camp directors and camp counselors, you're probably going to have tough conversations about this. And I think the #1 thing to do is to educate yourself and to think of this on a timeline that may be a couple of years long. You may not have transgender campers now. You may in your heart want to support transgender campers, but your camp might not be ready to do so. And you would be doing transgender campers a disservice to say, hey, come on over, we're ready for you. Yeah, not a problem, we'll figure it out, it'll be fun. And instead to say, okay, this year we're gonna educate ourselves, we're gonna do the training, we're gonna get all the administration on board so we know, the leaders know what we're doing, and we're ready with some answers. And then next year we're gonna educate the staff, and then we're gonna roll this out. We're gonna do some focus groups with parents, we're gonna talk to them, we're gonna hear their concerns. And that way it doesn't seem so sudden, and that way you're not surprised by questions you haven't anticipated. There's no shame in saying you need to learn something before you can do it well. And I would really urge many institutions to take that slightly longer approach and to be able to tell prospective transgender campers, we are working on this, we want to be ready for you, and we will be there next year.
That's really cool. I haven't heard you explain that, before, that longer term approach. And I think it gives probably every director or owner of a summer youth program really specific, helpful direction if they have not yet welcomed transgender campers to their knowledge, into their camp. Yeah. Yeah, there was an earlier question that I think is a quick one, sure. And that is, you mentioned, Alex, not really seeing the value in the phrase gender neutral, but instead going with gender inclusive. Is all gender synonymous with gender inclusive? And really specifically, the person was asking, can we use the term all gender? Does that work for bathrooms, calling it the all gender bathroom, or is there some additional important meaning to gender inclusive?
Sure. I'm glad we're talking about I love to talk about bathrooms. I spend a lot of my day talking about bathrooms. Yeah, I think all gender is a really good term, okay. And just as good as gender inclusive. And depending on the population you're working with, all gender may be more accessible as a term than gender inclusive. but that depends. Gender neutral, I don't like. Co-ed, I think is problematic. And it really bothers me when institutions say, we're just going to take this restroom and call it a restroom. It's like, no, don't lose your chance to do some education. By hanging an all gender or a gender inclusive sign, you are potentially starting some conversations, even if they're tough conversations. Someone's going to say, what does that mean? Why are you doing that? Why are you calling it that instead of a restroom? And that's an opportunity to have a great conversation and get across what it is that you're up to as a camp.
Good. Well, in the last couple of minutes here, I wanted to shift. I know this webinar is talking about welcoming transgender campers, but I know we have staff members who are transgender as well, or staff members who are transitioning, who are newly transgender. So what are your insights, both of you, about, is there anything different about when it's a staff member versus a camper in these situations? And, how do we best support our staff?
Yeah, I think it is a little different. I mean, most staff members, with some exceptions, are going to be adults, and so they have a bit more control over their own autonomy. But I think in other ways it's similar. You want to anticipate before before you have an incident, before you have an individual who's doing this, and you want to really think through realistically, what have we set up, what systems do we have in place to help this person, and who would we need to tell? Would we necessarily need to or want to tell campers and parents and even other staff members? If this person wants to keep it private, is that okay? And if we say, yes, you can keep this private, we won't tell anybody, what happens if someone finds out? So I think you want to anticipate all of those questions and talk them through with the individual. There will never be so many transgender people at one camp that you can't handle folks on a case-by-case basis. We come in small numbers. And so you can always work with that person and kind of tailor it to their needs. I also think an adult who's transitioning or has transitioned is going to be in a better place to say what they need to help them than a child. And so it's more of a conversation that they can, where they have the ability to speak for themselves.
And I think you may have mentioned this as well, Alex, but let's remember the fiduciary duty that we have as staff members, whether you're volunteer or paid, to care for the young people we're supervising or in our group. And primarily we're there to attend to their needs, not the other way around. Now, I wouldn't have returned to camp for 37 summers if young people and being around young people and their honesty, sometimes brutal honesty, didn't really, push me to learn and feed my soul with, a lot of their energy. And at the same time, anything that I'm going through, unless it's that I'm, tired or something like that, maybe something that I want to share with another adult. Having a community where, say, campers' gender, sexuality is a fair topic for discussion, and one for which staff are, prepared and trained, and the parents are coached, and all the things that we've talked about, still means that we need to be respecting the professional boundaries that exist between the adult caregivers and the the campers. And at the same time, and again, this is really something, Alex, as you said at the beginning, deciding what as a community we stand for and what sorts of things we share, I think is so important. But an adult who is going through a personal struggle is, I think, best served by consulting with other adults rather than, pulling kids into that conversation. Some of those kids would be awesome in that conversation, but others might be, surprised or even uncomfortable.
I do think that one challenge of transgender staff members coming out is it's much more visible than other struggles that people might be going through, and it involves, as one of the people in chat have said, changes in pronouns and names potentially. And so campers will have to handle that, which might be something that by necessity has to be shared.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the use of pronouns in the discussion with campers, making it clear, these are my pronouns, this is my name. Everybody makes mistakes. If you misgender me, I'm going to gently correct you. And if you want to talk about this, let's talk about this. But when it's volleyball time, we're going to play volleyball. That's what I'm here for. So it's not like just because I'm out and just because you know this, we're going to talk about it all the time, or even whenever you have a question. There's time for that and there's not time for that. So I do think it is really important to draw those boundaries, but still make yourself open. That's how we can be role models. And I think it's really crucial that a staff member be able to be their whole self and not be closeted, and still be able to draw that appropriate boundary about when and where they share.
Right.
Yeah, you stated that perfectly, and I hope people, even if they're attending the live session, go back to the recording and listen to that, over and over again. We sometimes forget that every person on the planet is advertising something about themselves, just in the way they talk, the way they carry themselves, the way they use language, the way they dress, and there could be no better place than a supportive youth program like a camp to discuss some of those things. And also, as you point out, the adult has an opportunity to say, it's volleyball time. And that's a balance that really defines our professionalism. But I also love that you said, sometimes we're going to make mistakes, and we can guide each other in supportive ways and getting even better at some of our human interactions.
So I want to ask you one more question. So can I ask for 2 or 3 bonus minutes to the webinar?
Yes.
Right?
And I also, you can have your bonus minutes, and people should stick around not only for the bonus minutes, but for the names of the 3 people who are each going to get a $50 gift certificate to everythingsummercamp.com. So stay with us, because there's some big time swag coming your way.
That's huge.
So go ahead, Sarah.
So Carson writes in the chat, how can I, as a transgender camp professional, help my camp become more inclusive? And what are your recommendations for the best outlets to share my experiences? So part of that question is, coming from the point of view of a transgender staff member. And then the other point of view is maybe someone that doesn't have a ton of power in camp too. If you're not the big director, how do you institute or start to initiate change when you're not calling all the shots? So what would you say to our friend Carson?
Yeah, I think that, and keep in mind that if a transgender staff member feels that way, transgender campers probably feel it even more. And I think that's the route of appeal that I would take to the owner or the director of the camp, and to say, I'm speaking up on my own behalf, but I'm also speaking up on behalf of all the campers who are here, who are questioning, or who are in the process of coming out. And I think we should be doing this and appeal to the camp's mission and values. You can offer yourself as a resource, or you can offer somebody else who you think would be good as a resource. And I will say, sometimes as a transgender person, I do a lot of my own self-promotion, but I love it when I can recommend a friend of mine or a program that I've worked with who can come in and do that work. And suggest it first on an adult level. That always feels safer, just to talk to adults. But I would refer to the need of the campers. It's not all about you as a transgender person. It's about the camp experience. And whether you know it or want it, you do have transgender campers at your camp.
Absolutely. Great. Well, I think that was a nice way to end the bonus minutes. Thank you, Alex.
Oh.
Thank you, Chris.
Sure.
And I know everyone's on the edge of their seat waiting for the big raffle.
So here we go. These 3 people will get an email from us and our co-sponsor, everythingsummercamp.com. For those of you who don't know, everythingsummercamp.com, as the name suggests, has gear from the best trunks and footlockers in the industry to flashlights and sweatshirts, and they can also warehouse your branded material. So if you don't want a giant closet full of t-shirts with your summer program's name on it, but you would like those readily accessible, Everything Summer Camp is your place. And I'm happy to say that Drew Demery Jaleesa Danoff and Elise Wiley are our 3 randomly chosen winners, and they will receive an email with a promo code worth $50 at everythingsummercamp.com.
So fun. I'm just excited for them.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, Alex, any final thoughts, resources? People can reach out. I know there were some questions in the chat about how do we start to formulate these checklists or, conversation points. Seems like maybe they should reach out to you, Alex, if they're looking to develop something like that. It's a big question.
I'm absolutely happy to talk more in depth or answer specific questions, or simply point folks to resources. And of course, I love to visit camps and do training for staff. So.
Great.
Fantastic. I will remind people that Alex's email, Sarah's email, my email will be posted in the recording of this. If you didn't copy our emails when you registered, which is fine, but you can also certainly do a Google search for us. You can find our websites. We each have websites. We each have emails. And we each would love to hear from people with follow-up questions. I will post in about 24 hours a recording of this webinar on Expert Online Training's YouTube channel. I've posted the link to part 1 of this webinar series, and you can also find that on our YouTube channel. So lots of resources and lots of ways to get in touch with us.
Fabulous. All right. Well, we'll be back probably another time. We just love to chat with each other. So hopefully we'll see all of you again soon. And thanks for tuning in.
All right.
All right.
Thank
well,
you.
Thank you all. And on behalf of Expert Online Training, grateful that you joined us or watching the recording. And check out expertonlinetraining.com for more than 130 video training modules that will help get your staff ready for the upcoming season. So Sarah, Alex, thank you both very much. And we'll talk soon.